Daniel had learned how to move quietly through life. Not the kind of quiet where no one notices you, but the kind where you carry your weight without asking for help. He woke up every day at 5 a.m., before the sun came up, before the city started to hum. The small apartment he shared with his daughter was always cold in the mornings, and he would tiptoe across the hallway so he wouldn't wake her too early. He liked those first few minutes alone. The world felt still, manageable. He would start the coffee, then open a fridge and look at what he could turn into lunch for his 8-year-old daughter. Some days, it was a peanut butter sandwich. Other days, it was leftovers packed carefully into a small plastic container. He always added a little note on a folded piece of paper. Nothing big, just things like, "You've got this," or "Smile today," or sometimes a badly drawn heart. He wasn't good with words, but he tried. After packing her lunch, he would wake her gently. She always stretched like a cat and asked the same question every morning. "Is it a school day?" "Yes," he would say with a smile. She would groan, then laugh. Their mornings were simple. He helped her brush her hair, though he still hadn't figured out how to make it look neat. He watched online videos to learn how to braid, but his fingers were rough and big, and the braids always came out uneven. She didn't mind. She would look in a mirror and say, "It's fine, Dad," even when it clearly wasn't. He dropped her at school by 7:30 a.m., always giving her a long hug before she ran inside. He watched until she disappeared through the doors. Only then would he head to work. Daniel worked as a maintenance supervisor in a large office building downtown. It was one of those tall glass buildings that looked impressive from the outside, but felt cold on the inside. He had been working there for 6 years. He knew every hallway, every flickering light, every door that didn't close properly. Most people in the building barely noticed him. He was the guy who fixed things, the guy who changed bulbs and repaired leaks, the guy who stayed late when something broke. He didn't mind. He preferred working with tools instead of people. Tools made sense. If something was broken, you found the problem and fixed it. Simple. People were harder. The building was owned by a large company, and at the top of that company was Mr. Reynolds. Everyone knew Mr. Reynolds. He was tall, always dressed in sharp suits, and walked like he was in a hurry even when he wasn't. His voice was firm and controlled. He rarely smiled. When he stepped onto a floor, conversation slowed down. People straightened their backs and pretended to be busy. Daniel had spoken to him only a handful of times. Each time had been short. "There's a leak in conference room B. The elevator inspection is overdue. Why was the hallway light out this morning?" No greeting. No small talk. Daniel never took it personally. He had met people like that before. People who carried pressure on their shoulders and didn't know how to set it down. Still, the tension in the building was real. When Mr. Reynolds sent an email, everyone read it twice. When he scheduled a meeting, people got nervous. That Thursday had already been long. A pipe had burst on the 3rd floor early in the morning. Daniel had spent hours shutting off water lines and drying carpets. By lunchtime, his back ached and his hands smelled like metal and dust. He checked his phone during a short break. A message from his daughter's teacher. She forgot her homework folder today. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. He knew she had placed it near the door the night before. He must have stepped over it without noticing. Guilt pressed against his chest, but he pushed it aside. He would talk to her about it gently later. He typed back, "Thank you for letting me know." No excuses. By 4:30 p.m., he was ready to leave. He needed to pick up his daughter from after-school care by 5:30. He was cleaning up his tools when his phone buzzed. It was a message from his supervisor. "Mr. Reynolds wants the maintenance reports updated tonight. Says it can't wait." Daniel looked at the clock. Of course it couldn't wait. He sighed quietly and replied, "I'll handle it." He called the after-school program and said he'd be about 20 minutes late. They were used to it. He hated that they were used to it. He headed back to the small office near the basement where he kept records. The reports weren't complicated, just detailed. Every repair, every inspection, every small fix had to be documented. As he worked, the building slowly emptied. The noise faded. The elevators stopped running as often. By 6:15 p.m., the place felt almost hollow. He finished the reports printed them, and placed them neatly in a folder. He didn't want to leave them on his supervisor's desk. He wanted them delivered directly. He took the elevator up to the executive floor. It felt different up there. The carpets were thicker, the lights softer, the walls decorated with framed photos of awards and important events. It smelled faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. Most of the offices were dark, except one, Mr. Reynolds' office. The light was on. Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to interrupt, but he also didn't want to leave the folder outside the door. As he stepped closer, he noticed the door wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open. He lifted his hand to knock. Then he heard something that made him freeze. Not talking, not footsteps. A sound he hadn't expected. It was soft at first, almost like someone clearing their throat. Then he realized it was crying. Daniel stood still, his hand hovering near the door. He felt like he had stepped into a moment that wasn't meant for him. The sound came again, low, broken, not loud, but heavy. He should have walked away. He knew that, but something kept him there. He gently knocked on the door. The crying stopped immediately. There was a quick shuffle inside, like papers being moved. Yes! The voice was sharp, but strained. Daniel pushed the door open just a little more. Sir, I have the updated reports. Mr. Reynolds was sitting behind his large desk, but he didn't look the same. His suit jacket was off, his tie loosened, his eyes were red. A stack of papers was spread out in front of him, and one of them looked like a hospital bill. For a second, neither of them spoke. Daniel felt like he had walked into someone's private storm. Mr. Reynolds quickly straightened up and wiped his face. Leave it on the desk, he said, his voice firm again, but not steady. Daniel stepped forward and placed the folder down. As he did, he couldn't help but notice a photo frame turned slightly toward the desk. It showed a teenage boy, maybe 15 or 16, smiling at the camera. He was wearing a baseball cap and holding a trophy. Daniel looked away quickly. It wasn't his business. I'll head out now, he said quietly. He turned to leave. Then he heard a different sound. Not crying, not anger, just a long, tired breath. Mr. Harper. Daniel stopped and turned back. Yes, sir? Mr. Reynolds stared at the desk for a moment before looking up. His expression had changed. The hardness was still there, but it was thinner now. Cracked. Do you have children? He asked. The question caught Daniel off guard. Yes, he replied. A daughter. Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. His eyes shifted to the photo on his desk. My son, he said, almost himself. He's in the hospital. Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to seeing this side of the man. The powerful executive now looked like something else entirely. Like a father who hadn't slept. Like someone holding on to something fragile. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. He understood that look more than he wished he did. I'm sorry, he said softly. Mr. Reynolds gave a small nod, then straightened up again, pulling the walls back around himself. That will be all, he said. Daniel left the office without another word. As he walked down the quiet hallway toward the elevator, his mind felt heavy. He had spent years thinking of Mr. Reynolds as a cold, distant man, someone who cared more about reports than people. But the image of him sitting there, eyes red, staring at a hospital bill, wouldn't leave his head. When Daniel finally stepped outside the building, the air was cool and the sky was dark. He checked the time and hurried to his car. On the drive to pick up his daughter, he kept thinking about the sound he had heard before knocking. That quiet, broken sound. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. For the first time, he realized something simple but powerful. Even the strongest-looking people carry something heavy. And sometimes, you only see it when the door is left slightly open. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen in Mr. Reynolds' office. The memory of that quiet, broken sound followed him everywhere. At first, he tried to push it aside. He told himself it wasn't his business. He had his daughter to pick up, laundry to do, bills to pay, and a life that demanded every ounce of his attention. But no matter how he tried, that image kept returning. He found himself replaying the moment over and over in his head. The way Mr. Reynolds had slumped over the desk, the red rim around his eyes, the small, framed photograph of his son, leaning slightly on the corner of the desk. For the first time, Daniel realized that the man he had always feared and quietly respected as a distant figure was human, just like him, vulnerable, scared, and holding on to hope that he wasn't sure would last. At home, Daniel was unusually quiet. His daughter noticed. She asked why he seemed tired, why he didn't talk as much at dinner. He smiled at her, ruffled her hair, and said nothing because he didn't want to scare her. He needed to understand what he had witnessed before putting it into words. The next day at work, Daniel found himself walking past Mr. Reynolds' office more slowly than usual. He hadn't intended to, but something drew him. He didn't want to interrupt. He wasn't looking for drama. He just needed to make sure the man was okay, in a way that didn't feel intrusive. He caught a glimpse of the office door as he walked by. It was closed this time. No light shone from inside. The silence felt heavier than usual. Daniel went about his work, fixing leaky pipes, checking faulty lights, and replacing broken doors. But his mind kept drifting back. He tried to focus, telling himself that his job was to fix things, not people. Yet something inside him knew that today might change more than just a building. By mid-afternoon, the quiet finally cracked. A small announcement came over the office intercom. There will be a blood donation drive in the main lobby from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Daniel paused. He had never participated in a blood drive before. He had heard people talking about them casually, but he had never given it much thought. Work had always been exhausting, and home was busy. But today, for some reason, he felt a tug. He remembered the look in Mr. Reynolds' eyes, the photograph of his son, the way he had seemed so small and overwhelmed, even though he carried himself like a man who never faltered. When the lunch hour came, Daniel decided to step into the lobby. He had never noticed before how big it was, how polished the floors shone under the fluorescent lights, and how the windows let sunlight spill across the room. Volunteers in light blue shirts were setting up tables, checking paperwork, and greeting employees. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and curiosity. A nurse approached him, clipboard in hand. "First time?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." She smiled warmly. "It's easy. Just a few questions, a quick test, and then we can see if you can donate today." He answered her questions honestly. No health issues. No medications that would prevent donation. A simple physical check. Blood pressure, pulse, a quick finger prick. Everything seemed normal. When she looked at the test results, her eyes widened slightly. "You might be a match for a specific type we've been looking for," she said softly. "It's rare. Are you willing to go further?" Daniel hesitated. His mind immediately raced to Mr. Reynolds. He didn't know the man's situation for sure, but he had a strong feeling. He didn't know if the boy needed blood or a more serious procedure, but he thought maybe this could help. Maybe he could do something quietly, without drawing attention, without changing his life too much. "Yes," he said finally. "I'll do it." The nurse guided him through the next steps. Daniel sat in a chair as they drew blood, feeling a mix of anxiety and calm. His hands were clammy, but not from fear, more from anticipation. There was something quietly meaningful about this act, something he couldn't explain. It wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about doing the right thing. While he was sitting there, he noticed other employees walking past. Some smiled, some waved, some didn't notice him at all, but he didn't care. Today, he was here for someone else. After the procedure, Daniel returned to his office. He tried to act normally, typing up reports, checking the elevators, making rounds, but he felt lighter. A quiet sense of satisfaction lingered under the exhaustion. He didn't tell anyone what he had done. Not his co-workers, not his friends, not even his daughter. This was a small, secret choice. One that mattered only because it could help someone he didn't even know well yet. Days passed. Work continued. The building hummed with life. Mr. Reynolds still carried the same air of authority, the same sharpness, the same distance. But Daniel noticed subtle changes. When they briefly crossed paths, Mr. Reynolds would offer a nod or a small acknowledgement, something warmer than before. Daniel didn't know if it was connected to the donation or if it was simply coincidence, but it reminded him that even small actions could ripple quietly. One evening, a week later, Daniel was heading home after another long day. He had picked up his daughter, made dinner, and helped her with homework. She had asked him about school stories, and he told her the usual small things, careful to leave out the larger weight of life he carried. Then, late that night, a call came. It was from the hospital. They confirmed that he was the closest match for a patient who had been waiting for weeks for a donation. A critical match. Daniel froze. His mind immediately went to Mr. Reynolds. He didn't know F.O. Are certain, but it felt like fate. The timing. The photographs. The fear he had witnessed in the office. Everything pointed toward the man and his son. Without hesitation, he agreed to the next steps. He cleared his schedule. He made arrangements for his daughter. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The procedure would take time, and recovery wasn't simple. But he also knew that sometimes life asks you to do something bigger than yourself, something that carries risk, but also immense meaning. The hospital staff guided him through the process carefully. They explained the procedure, the risks, the recovery time. Daniel listened. He asked questions. He signed forms. All the while, he felt a quiet determination building inside him. This was about more than a donation. It was about a chance to make a difference. Quietly, without fanfare, without expectation. On the day of the procedure, Daniel walked into the hospital early in the morning. The waiting room was calm, almost empty. He was nervous, of course, but not scared. There was a sense of purpose that steadied him. He was doing something real, something tangible, something that mattered. As he lay on the bed, waiting for the nurses to begin, his mind wandered back to the office, to the small photograph of the boy on Mr. Reynolds' desk, to the man who carried so much responsibility and fear behind a suit and a stern face. Daniel realized how little anyone truly knew about the battles people fought behind closed doors. He thought about his daughter, about how he wanted to teach her kindness, courage, and empathy. This was a moment to embody those lessons, silently, courageously. The procedure was long and draining. His body ached afterward, but there was also a profound sense of peace. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need thanks. Just knowing he could help someone like him, someone carrying the weight of fatherhood and fear, was enough. During the days that followed, Daniel recovered quietly. He returned to work, to his daughter, to the life that always demanded more than he felt he could give. Yet there was a new lightness in him, a quiet confidence that comes from doing something selfless without expectation. He watched Mr. Reynolds during this time, noting subtle shifts. The man seemed less rigid, less tense. There was a gentleness in the brief moments their paths crossed. A nod here, a soft acknowledgement there. Daniel didn't know if Mr. Reynolds knew who had stepped forward. He didn't need to. The act itself had changed something, not for recognition, but for life itself. And in those quiet moments, Daniel reflected on a lesson he had learned without words. Sometimes life asks you to act not for yourself, but for someone else. And in doing so, it changes not only their life, but your own. It was a simple truth, yet profound. Sometimes, the smallest choices make the largest difference. Daniel returned to his routine after the hospital procedure, though life felt different now. Each morning, the small apartment he shared with his daughter seemed brighter. The sunlight slipped through the blinds in a way that made him pause for just a second longer before getting out of bed. Even the creaks in the floorboards felt less heavy. He had done something important, something bigger than his everyday life. And though it had taken effort and left him exhausted, he felt a quiet sense of strength he hadn't noticed before. His daughter noticed too. She didn't ask about the hospital, didn't ask why he had been away. She just asked why he seemed to smile a little more, laugh a little easier. He shrugged and told her, "Just feeling good today." She accepted that answer, as children often do, and went on to tell him about her day, about a drawing she had made in school, about a funny thing one of her friends had said. At work, things felt lighter as well. The building hummed with the usual activity. Employees passed by Daniel's office, but he barely noticed them. His focus had shifted. Where before he counted the hours, the tasks, the problems that needed fixing, now he saw small things differently. A colleague struggling with a stuck drawer didn't seem annoying anymore. He saw someone just try and do their job. A light flickering in the hallway didn't feel like another chore. It felt like a small opportunity to make someone's day easier. And then there was Mr. Reynolds. Daniel couldn't ignore him, no matter how hard he tried. The man's presence in the building had always been intimidating, but now, after everything, Daniel felt a sense of quiet curiosity. He wanted to understand him better. He didn't want to overstep, didn't want to ask questions that weren't meant for him. But he wanted to know if the fear and worry he had glimpsed in that office days ago had lifted even a little. One afternoon, Daniel was called to the executive floor to check on a minor plumbing issue. The pipes near the conference room had started leaking again, and it required a quick fix. He carried his tools quietly, trying not to draw attention, and entered the hall leading to Mr. Reynolds' office. The door was closed this time. No light leaked from under it. Daniel paused for a moment, listening. The silence felt different now. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't tense. There was something almost peaceful about it. He knocked lightly, but there was no response. He set to work repairing the pipes, focusing on each twist of the wrench, each turn of the valve. His mind wandered, as it often did these days, to what had happened in the hospital. He thought about the boy, though he didn't know much about him. He imagined the fear that had gripped his father, the uncertainty, the hope clinging to every heartbeat. Daniel felt a connection to that fear, to that hope, in a way that surprised him. It was as if he had touched a hidden part of life that few people ever did. Later that week, a small notice went around the office. The company had scheduled a follow-up wellness check for employees who had participated in the blood drive. Daniel signed up quietly. He didn't tell anyone, didn't boast or mention it. He simply wanted to know that the act he had done was still making a difference. When he arrived for the check, the nurse recognized him immediately. "Good to see you again," she said warmly. "Everything looks perfect. Your donation really helped someone in need." Daniel nodded, feeling a small warmth in his chest. He didn't ask who the recipient was. He didn't need to. The knowledge that it mattered, that it had made a real difference, was enough. Over the next few days, he noticed subtle changes in Mr. Reynolds. The boss, who had always seemed untouchable, unapproachable, was moving differently through the office. He still commanded respect, still had that air of authority, but there was a softness now in his gestures. He nodded at employees in passing, lingered for a brief word here or there, even smiled occasionally. Daniel watched quietly, noticing without judgment. He didn't expect recognition. He didn't need it. He simply felt the ripple of what happened, the way one small act of courage could change not only a life he might never meet, but the atmosphere of an entire workplace. One evening, after a particularly long day, Daniel stayed late to finish a series of minor repairs. The office was quiet, the hum of the elevators and the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights the only sounds. As he walked past Mr. Reynolds' office, the door was slightly ajar again. Curiosity tugged at him. He knew he should leave it alone, that he had no business peeking. But he paused for just a second and looked inside. Mr. Reynolds was on the phone, speaking softly, almost whispering. His shoulders were slumped, but his hands gripped the edge of the desk tightly. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he could see the tension in the man's posture. There was still fear, still worry, but now it was paired with determination, a resolve that Daniel recognized. He left quietly, closing the door behind him. It wasn't his place to intervene. It was enough to know that the man was fighting, trying, struggling in his own way. At home, Daniel reflected on all of this while helping his daughter with a school project. She was building a small model of the solar system from clay, and her hands were messy with paint and glue. She laughed as she tried to balance the planets, and Daniel smiled, enjoying the sound. It reminded him that life went on, that even amid fear, worry, and hardship, small moments of joy persisted. The next day, something unexpected happened. Daniel received a message from the hospital. They asked him to confirm a few details for follow-up tests related to the donation. He answered promptly, and later that afternoon, a courier delivered a short note from the hospital. It was brief, polite, and anonymous. It simply said that the patient was stable and doing well. Daniel read the note twice. He felt relief, yes, but also a quiet satisfaction. No one knew that he had been the donor. No one needed to know. He had given without expectation, without seeking acknowledgement. It was a small secret that carried enormous weight. At work, he continued his rounds. He fixed leaking faucets, replaced broken light switches, and adjusted air vents. Each task felt slightly different now. Every repair he made wasn't just about the building. It was about life, about the small things that kept people going. He noticed employees struggling with their tasks and offer help without being asked. He smiled more often, laughed quietly at small jokes, and even took a moment to ask someone how their day had gone. He noticed a change in himself. It wasn't dramatic. No one else would have seen it, but he carried himself differently. There was a quiet confidence in his movements, a calm in his voice, a patience in his tone. He felt like a part of life had shifted for him, a part that was grounded in compassion, in courage, in the quiet act of choosing to help. Weeks went by. The hospital confirmed that the patient was improving steadily. Daniel didn't let it change his routine, didn't let it inflate his ego. He returned to the small apartment each evening, greeted his daughter, made dinner, and helped with homework. He stayed late at the office when needed, always careful to balance work and life, always thinking about the lessons he wanted to teach his daughter: kindness, empathy, courage. Then came a day when he noticed Mr. Reynolds standing near the lobby, watching the flow of employees with quiet focus. Something about the way the man held himself was different, less rigid, less controlled. There was a gentleness in his gestures that Daniel hadn't seen before. He didn't know if it was connected to the donation, to the recovery, to the weight that had been lifted. He didn't need to know. It was enough to observe that even people who seem untouchable can change, can grow, can soften. That afternoon, Daniel walked past Mr. Reynolds in the hallway. Their eyes met briefly. There was no smile, no acknowledgement, nothing overt. But Daniel felt a quiet, understanding pass between them. Something unspoken, yet deeply human. A shared knowledge that life was unpredictable, that fear and hope often walked hand in hand, and that small acts of courage could ripple in ways that no one could anticipate. He returned to his work, fixing doors, checking lights, making small repairs. Each turn of the wrench, each twist of the screw, felt like more than a task. It felt like a contribution, like a connection, like a tiny thread in the larger fabric of human life. That night, when he came home, his daughter asked about his day. He told her the usual things: fixing a door, checking a light, helping someone with a stuck drawer. She listened, nodding, drawing quietly at the table. He smiled at her, ruffled her hair, and thought about the secret he carried, the quiet difference he had made. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about reward. It was about understanding, about connection, about the way one small act could change the course of someone else's life. It was about the invisible threads that tied people together, the shared struggles, the private battles, the moments when someone chose to step forward when it mattered most. Daniel realized something important. Life wasn't about grand gestures or public acclaim. It was about these quiet decisions, these small acts of courage, these moments of empathy that often went unnoticed. It was about seeing the humanity in others, even those who seemed distant, even those who seemed untouchable. And he understood deeply that his life, his choices, and his actions could ripple farther than he ever imagined. One act, quietly done, could change the lives of people he didn't even know well yet. It could alter the atmosphere of a place, shift the hearts of others, and remind everyone, in small ways, that kindness, courage, and humanity were always possible. Daniel had settled into a rhythm after the hospital procedure, but life had a way of reminding him that nothing stayed simple for long. His days were filled with the usual work: checking pipes, fixing broken doors, replacing flickering lights. But now, everything carried a weight that he hadn't noticed before. Every action felt connected to something bigger, even if he didn't yet know how. One afternoon, while walking down a quiet hallway on the executive floor, Daniel saw Mr. Reynolds standing near the window. The city sprawled beneath him, the sunlight catching the glass of nearby buildings. Daniel stopped briefly, pretended to check his tools, but he couldn't help noticing the man's posture. He was standing very still, hands gripping the window ledge lightly, head bowed. Daniel realized that he was probably thinking, worrying, calculating, like he always did, but this time there was something softer about him, something that hadn't been there before. Daniel went about his tasks, repairing a leaky faucet and tightening loose screws on a door handle. He caught himself glancing at the office again, thinking about the quiet moment he had glimpsed days ago. Mr. Reynolds had been human in that instant, vulnerable in a way no one else at the company had ever seen. Daniel felt a mix of emotions, empathy, respect, and a strange curiosity. He wondered what it was like to carry that much fear for someone else every day. Later that week, Daniel was asked to stay after work to complete the maintenance logs. It wasn't unusual for him to stay late, but today, there was a lingering feeling in the air. The office was nearly empty, the hum of computers and soft buzz of lights the only sounds. He had just finished writing up a detailed report when a voice interrupted his thoughts. Daniel, he looked up and froze. Mr. Reynolds was standing at the doorway to the maintenance office. His expression was careful, measured, but not cold. It was the first time he had come down to where Daniel worked. "Yes, sir?" Daniel asked. Try to keep his voice steady. I wanted to thank you," Mr. Reynolds said. There was a slight pause, almost like he was choosing his words carefully. "For what you did, the donation." Daniel blinked. He had expected to remain anonymous, to let the act stay a quiet secret. He hadn't sought recognition. "It was nothing," he said softly. Mr. Reynolds shook his head. "No, it wasn't nothing. It was everything. You helped my son when we had almost lost hope. I don't know how to express what that means." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. The words were simple, but the emotion behind them was powerful. He hadn't expected thanks. He hadn't expected acknowledgement. But hearing it directly from Mr. Reynolds, in that quiet office, brought a wave of relief, pride, and humility all at once. "You don't need to say more," Daniel replied, feeling his voice steady despite the emotion. "I'm just glad he's doing better." Mr. Reynolds nodded, his eyes slightly misty. "He is. He really is. And I want you to know that your actions change more than just his life. They've changed mine too. I see things differently now. I see people differently." Daniel looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of the moment. He realized that sometimes acts of kindness reach farther than immediate effect. Sometimes they ripple into ways you cannot measure, touching hearts, altering perspectives, and opening doors that have been closed for years. Over the following days, Daniel noticed subtle changes in the office. Mr. Reynolds began speaking more directly to employees, asking small questions, acknowledging their efforts. He still carried authority, but the distance had softened. He offered advice without sharpness, nodded at a solution without impatience, and even smiled briefly when someone made a joke. Daniel observed these shifts quietly, realizing that his small act had created ripples that affected not just one life, but the culture around him as well. One morning, Daniel was asked to fix a water pipe in the conference room where Mr. Reynolds held meetings. As he worked, he thought about the days leading up to the donation, about the worry, the fear, and the quiet courage that it had taken. He realized that courage wasn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, and invisible. Sometimes it was about stepping forward when no one was watching, when the stakes were high, and when the outcome was uncertain. As he finished the repair, Mr. Reynolds walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there and watched Daniel work. When the work was done, he finally spoke. "Daniel, I want you to know that what you did, it doesn't just go away," he said. His voice was low, sincere, and steady. "I've seen the difference it makes, not just for my son, but for everyone around here. You remind me what it means to care, truly care, for someone else." Daniel felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had never been recognized like this before, not in such a meaningful way. He had worked hard all his life, done what needed to be done, but this acknowledgement felt different. It was not about a paycheck or a title. It was about humanity. They stood in silence for a moment. Two men who had been strangers bound by circumstance, now connected by something deeper than work or authority. Daniel realized that he had always respected Mr. Reynolds, but now that respect was coupled with understanding, empathy, and even admiration. He saw a man who had been carrying fear, responsibility, and love all at once, and he realized how similar their struggles were in some ways, even though their lives seemed worlds apart. The days continued to pass, and the office slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Daniel carried on with his maintenance duties, but now with a quiet pride. Each repair, each small task, felt more significant. He realized that life was not only about the big moments, but about the tiny, quiet choices we make every day. One evening, as he was leaving the office, he saw Mr. Reynolds in the lobby. The man looked up as Daniel passed, and for a moment, their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but there was an understanding there. A recognition would have been shared, silently, without expectation or obligation. At home, Daniel reflected on the events of the past weeks while helping his daughter with homework. She talked about her school projects, her friends, her small daily victories. He listened, smiled, and offered encouragement. But inside, he felt a quiet satisfaction that went beyond words. He had done something meaningful, something that mattered, and the effects were visible not only in the life he had helped save, but in the way people moved and spoke around him. He realized that life often required courage in ways that were invisible, that the most important acts were not always seen or acknowledged, but they mattered all the same. That was the lesson he wanted to teach his daughter, that sometimes the quiet, unrecognized choices were the most powerful. One afternoon, Daniel received a message from the hospital asking him to attend a short follow-up check. He went, as usual, quietly and without fanfare. When he arrived, the staff greeted him warmly and confirmed that the patient was doing well. They didn't reveal his identity, and he didn't ask. The satisfaction came from knowing that a life had been changed, a family relieved, and someone's hope restored. Returning home that evening, he sat with his daughter at the kitchen table. She drew pictures with crayons while he prepared a small snack. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and her occasional giggles. He watched her, thinking about how much courage she would need in life, how she would face challenges, and how he could help her understand the power of small, meaningful actions. Daniel thought about Mr. Reynolds again, about the subtle changes he had witnessed, and realized that the ripples of one decision could spread far beyond what he imagined. A single act of courage, performed without expectation, could alter lives in ways that no one could predict. And he understood now that this was not about him. It was about humanity, empathy, and the quiet power of stepping forward when it matters most. The following week, Daniel noticed that Mr. Reynolds had started to make small efforts to interact with employees he had never spoken to before. He would stop by briefly to ask if someone needed help or guidance, or offer a simple word of encouragement. It was subtle, but significant. The office felt lighter. The atmosphere had shifted. People seemed more relaxed, more willing to speak, more willing to trust. Daniel smiled quietly to himself. He had not sought this change, nor had he expected it. But it was undeniable. A single, quiet action had begun to shift not just a family's life, but the culture around him. He realized that life was full of such opportunities, moments where the right choice could create unseen ripples. That evening, he sat with his daughter on the couch, reading a story before bed. She leaned against him, tired from the day, and he felt a deep sense of connection. Life would always be hard, always demanding, always filled with moments of fear and uncertainty. But he knew now that even small acts of courage, performed quietly and without expectation, could make a difference. They could change lives, shift hearts, and create hope where there had been none. Daniel closed the book, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. As he walked to his own room, he thought about the journey he had begun weeks ago. He had learned that courage often comes quietly, that humanity is stronger than fear, and that the simplest, most selfless actions can leave the deepest impact. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had truly made a difference, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Days passed, and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but something inside Daniel had shifted. The act he had done weeks earlier at the hospital, the quiet courage he found, still lingered in his mind. It wasn't just about helping someone in need anymore. It was about understanding what it meant to be human, to see the struggles of others, and to act without expectation. He carried that thought with him every day, quietly, like a small flame that refused to go out. At work, Daniel continued his usual tasks. He checked pipes, repaired broken doors, and fixed flickering lights. Every movement, every action, felt purposeful now in a way it never had before. He noticed things he had overlooked in the past. A janitor struggling to lift a heavy bag of trash, a colleague fumbling with office supplies, a tired intern carrying boxes across the hallway. He helped without thinking, not for recognition, not for praise, but because it was the right thing to do. And then one morning, Daniel noticed something unusual. Mr. Reynolds had called him into the executive floor, a place he rarely visited unless there was work that could not be done elsewhere. Daniel walked cautiously, carrying a small tool bag, unsure of what to expect. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet, and he could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant footsteps of security guard. When he reached the office, Mr. Reynolds was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. His back was straight, but his hands were clasped behind him. For a moment, he didn't turn to face Daniel, and the silence felt heavier than words. "Daniel," Mr. Reynolds said finally, his voice calm but firm, "please come in." Daniel stepped inside, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had no idea why he was here. He had never been called to the executive office for anything other than work matters. "I want to thank you properly," Mr. Reynolds continued, turning to face him. "Not just for the donation, but for showing me what it means to act selflessly, to care without expecting anything in return. I've seen the difference it makes. I've seen it in the office, in the way people respond, and I've seen it in myself." Daniel shifted uneasily. He wasn't used to this kind of conversation. He had spent years keeping to himself, focusing on work, his daughter, and the daily responsibilities that never seemed to end. Compliments, acknowledgments, even thanks were rare. He didn't know how to respond. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said finally, keeping his voice low. I wanted to help." Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "I understand, and that's why it matters. Because it was genuine. Because it came from the right place. And it's changed more than you realize. It's changed me. It's changed how I see people, how I treat people, how I carry myself. And I want to do something for you, Daniel. Something more than words." Daniel frowned, unsure what he meant. Mr. Reynolds continued, "I want to offer you a promotion, a position that gives you better hours, more flexibility, and recognition for your work. You deserve it. You've shown courage, integrity, and care that goes far beyond the job description." Daniel shook his head, feeling a mixture of disbelief and hesitation. I don't know what to say. I didn't do anything special." Mr. Reynolds smiled faintly. "You did something special. More than anything I've seen in a long time. And I want to make sure it's acknowledged." Daniel took a deep breath. He had never expected this. He had never sought it. And yet, he realized that this wasn't just about a job or a promotion. It was about recognition of who he was, not what he did. It was validation that acts of kindness, courage, and humanity mattered, even in small, quiet ways. Over the next few weeks, Daniel adjusted to his new role. The work itself didn't change much. He was still responsible for the maintenance of the building, but the way people treated him did. Colleagues who had previously been distant smiled when they passed him. The janitors, the interns, the administrative staff all offered a nod, a wave, a quiet acknowledgement of respect. Even small gestures that might have gone unnoticed before now felt meaningful. And Mr. Reynolds changed as well. He became more approachable, more human in his interactions. He still carried authority, still made difficult decisions, but there was a softness in his tone, a willingness to listen, and a patience that hadn't been there before. Daniel noticed it every day, not because it was flashy, but because it was real. One evening, Daniel stayed late at the office again. The building was quiet, the only sounds coming from the hum of the elevators and the distant buzz of the lights. He was checking a faulty air vent when he heard footsteps behind him. "Daniel," Mr. Reynolds said softly. He turned, expecting perhaps another work-related issue. Instead, Mr. Reynolds held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. Curious, Daniel followed him to the office. Once inside, Mr. Reynolds gestured for him to sit. He took a deep breath, his eyes softer than Daniel had ever seen. "I wanted you to meet him," he said. Daniel blinked. There, sitting quietly in the corner, was Mr. Reynolds' son. He looked pale but alert, his hair slightly messy, a small smile on his face. "This is him," Daniel asked softly, unsure what to say. Mr. Reynolds nodded. "This is my son. He's doing better now. Stronger than we could have hoped. And he wanted to meet the person who helped him when he needed it most." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't expected this. He had given anonymously, quietly, without seeking acknowledgement, and now he was face to face with the person whose life had been saved by his action. The boy smiled faintly, extending a hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "I don't know who you are, but thank you for helping me." Daniel took his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. "You're welcome," he said. "I'm glad you're okay." They talked quietly for a few minutes. The son spoke about his recovery, about the hospital, about the moments when he had been scared. Daniel listened, offering encouragement, sharing small words of comfort. There was a connection there, simple and human, forged by a moment of courage that had rippled into this new reality. After the meeting, Daniel returned to his apartment that evening with his daughter. He told her little about what had happened, only that he had helped someone in need. She nodded, accepting it. But Daniel felt a quiet pride that was impossible to explain in words. The weeks that followed brought small, meaningful changes. Daniel's relationship with Mr. Reynolds shifted completely. They spoke with mutual respect, shared quiet conversations, and occasionally laughed about small things at work. The fear and distance that had once defined their interactions vanished, replaced by understanding and empathy. Daniel noticed that he carried himself differently as well. He walked with more confidence, spoke with more calm, and approached each day with a sense of purpose that extended beyond the maintenance work he did. He understood now that the smallest acts of courage, when done without expectation, could have profound consequences. They could save lives, heal hearts, and transform relationships. One afternoon, as he picked up his daughter from school, she noticed something different in him. "Dad," she said, "you seem happy, really happy." He smiled and hugged her tightly. "I am," he said. "Life is better when we do what we can help others, even in small ways." She nodded, not fully understanding, but accepting his words as truth. And Daniel realized that this was part of the legacy he wanted to pass on. Lessons not in money or recognition, but in courage, empathy, and humanity. The final change came quietly one evening. Daniel was walking through the lobby when he noticed a group of employees talking and laughing. Mr. Reynolds was among them, smiling openly, relaxed in a way that Daniel had never seen. He realized then that one small act of courage, performed quietly and selflessly, had created a ripple that touched not just a family, not just an office, but the atmosphere of a place where people spent so much of their lives. Daniel walked past, smiling to himself. He had never sought recognition. He had never expected gratitude. He had simply acted because it was the right thing to do. And now, watching the subtle shift around him, he understood the profound truth. One quiet act, done without expectation, can change lives forever. That night, as he tucked his daughter into bed, he whispered a small thought to himself. Life is full of moments where courage matters. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be public. The smallest acts, the quietest choices, can ripple outward in ways we never imagined. And sometimes those ripples change everything, for others and for ourselves. Daniel turned off the light, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had learned that courage, compassion, and humanity are always worth the effort, and that even in the quietest corners of life, the choices we make can leave a mark that lasts far longer than we ever imagined. As he sat in the dark, listening to the soft breathing of his daughter, he realized that life had a way of rewarding courage in ways that were invisible at first, but unmistakable in the end. One quiet act had connected two families, changed the workplace, and taught him lessons he would carry forever. And in that moment, Daniel knew something simple but powerful. True change doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real.